ahead.
My name is Neil Jensen. I came from Stephen, Minnesota. Right now I'm living in Mankato, Minnesota. And I guess this is about my military career, so to speak. I entered the Air Force after graduating from high school. As I recall, it was in August, and it was prior to my 18th birthday, so my parents had to sign for me. And military career was basically non-eventful.
So Neil, Neil, when you did you know anybody when you went in? Did you go by yourself?
Oh no, I went with my actually my father's cousin, David Jensen. We joined together, and we were one generation separated, but my grandfather and his father were brothers, and one was older and one was younger, so we got skipped a generation. At any rate, as I said, my Air Force career was non-eventful.
So where did you go to basic?
Both David and myself joined, as I said, prior to our 18th birthday, and we joined in Fargo, North Dakota, where they put us on a train, and we traveled for 3 days on a train going to San Antonio, Texas, to Lackland Air Force Base. And I spent the first month in basic training in Texas, and then got transferred to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi.
Neil, what was basic training like for you? I mean, was it hard or?
No, it was actually quite easy. Everything went okay. The only difficulty I did have that I recall was in firing an M1 carbine on a firing range, and we had to fire 3 shots to sight the rifle in. And on the first 3 shots I did okay, and I was sighting it in. And then I think we had to fire 3 more shots. And on the second shot, the rifle made a funny sound. And the trigger was locked, and I couldn't eject the shell or anything. And per directions, I raised my hand and laid the rifle down on the ground. And instructor came and picked it up and found that the bolt had cracked diagonally, and part of it had slid back against the second part, and part of the brass casing had ejected itself in front of the bolt, and I assume went up past my face, airborne. But so anyway, I had to get another carbine and redo everything, except by now everybody was firing on the firing line, and I didn't have a chance to sight it in. So I had to basically correct for everything. I did pass, so it was fun. We had, in the basic training, we went through an obstacle course, and fortunately, we were the first flight of 100 men to go through the course, and therefore all the ropes and the logs and everything were dry, and we managed to do it quite well. We did have gas training where they gave us a gas mask, put us in a room, and put out tear gas.
What year was this, Neil?
And told us to that we were in a gassed room and we were going to have to take our gas masks off. And I knew what was going to happen, so I hyperventilated as best I could and breathed in as much air before I could take the gas mask off. And so far, after that, I kind of survived because I was letting it out slowly. So,
what year was this, Neil?
It was 1959, and it was quite warm down there, but we survived.
Okay. So, anything else in basic training that sticks out in your mind?
No, I remember David had a problem. He was climbing down a rope backwards, and he had a cold, and he had a package of cough drops in his pocket, and they fell out into the pool below, and the technical instructor made him go in after him. So that's the only thing else that I can recall.
Okay, so you get through basic training. Do you have a ceremony or anything?
Nope. They just put us on a bus and transferred us to Mississippi, Keesler Air Force Base, or the ones that were going there. David stayed in San Antonio and proceeded with his training, and I went to Keesler. So,
okay.
Keesler, I went into basic electronics training, and it went fairly uneventful. They had we had breaks during the instruction, and during one of the breaks, we went outside to a covered concrete platform, which had Coke machines and candy machines, etc. And it was raining that day, so the ground was quite wet. And I put a dime in a Coke machine and got the shock of my life. I picked myself off the ground, and there was something wrong with the machine anyway. It lit me up.
You're just a lucky guy.
I survived, but
so
at any rate, after basic electronics training, they transferred me to a different section of the training area, which was along the flight line, and it was a fenced-in area with barbed wire fences and electronic gates and a guard at first, and because it was a secure area, and it was for training on automatic tracking radar. And I remember, I think it was the first 3 days, we sat in a classroom and went through every page of all the manuals we were going to get and confirmed that they were all there. Because they didn't want us to swipe them for some reason. At any rate, the radar was quite old. it was used as a gun lane radar in World War II, latter part of World War II, and Korea. So it wasn't, like I say, it was quite old. Anyway, went through all that training and finally graduated, and I don't recall what kind of a graduation ceremony, if we had one. And after a couple of weeks, I think, I was transferred to Adams Field, which is the local airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, and there was an automatic tracking radar site off the outskirts of the airport, and another fenced-in area with an electronic gate. And that radar system was used for tracking aircraft bombers, B-52s and B-47s, and they were making practice bomb drops on designated targets around the city of Little Rock. And the radar that I repaired and operated was used to track those bombers and find out where the bombs theoretically hit. And that's what I did for the remainder of my 3 years in the Air Force.
You stayed in Arkansas the whole time? Little Rock?
Bigger.
You stayed in Little Rock, Arkansas the whole time? The rest of your career?
Did I what?
I'm sorry, I'm fighting a cold here, but did you stay in Little Rock, Arkansas for the rest of your career then?
No. I was at Little Rock about a year, and then I got transferred to, they closed that site, and I got transferred to Hastings, Nebraska, which is west of Omaha and Lincoln, and just south of Grand Island. And I spent the remaining 2 years, approximately 2 years, at Hastings, and doing the same thing, except that I had several temporary duty sites around the central United States. The group I was in was called the Combat Evaluation Group, CEG, and the site or the outfit was called RBS, Radar Bomb Scoring. And it was a detachment of a squadron, and my detachment was number 8, which was Hastings. They had sites in Michigan and all around the central United column of states. And as I said, I had temporary duty sites around the central parts of the states. I went to Greenville, Mississippi, San Saba, Texas, Strawville, North Dakota. I was also Heron Lake, Minnesota, and Army Nike sites around Minneapolis, St. Paul. There were 4 sites north, south, east, and west of Minneapolis, St. Paul area that were Army Nike sites, and they used the same type of radar and equipment that we used. I had a Army type weapons carrier, which had a uh, radio mounted in the back, and I used that to communicate with the aircraft to set up the practice bomb drops and do the communications having to do with the practice bomb drops. And I traveled from South Minneapolis to North Minneapolis to Wisconsin and back to west side of Minneapolis. And doing that, I think it was about a month and a half. Lived in their Army barracks and used their missiles. Not fun. Temporary duty sites that I went to, and Greenville, Mississippi, San Saba, Heron Lake, and Stroudsville, North Dakota, was on a train. They built radar units, generators, office, barracks, everything having to do with a small town to maintain the people that were operating the radar and keeping it up to date. At these various places, they called it the RBS Express, and there were 3 of them. We had, I think, number 1, and then there was one on the West Coast column and one on the East Coast column. They traveled around, go to a siding, set the train up on jacks, or the radar part up on jacks, and operate them, and they had targets designated around the site of the train to do the same thing we were doing at Hastings or Little Rock or wherever. And it was interesting. The one at really comes to mind was the one at Heron Lake, Minnesota. We had moved from San Saba, Texas, moved the train to Heron Lake, Minnesota in the winter. And the train siding had a long, shallow ditch between it and the highway that went by, and we parked our cars in the ditch. And being Minnesota in the wintertime, you understand what happens with snow and blowing snow. Our cars were buried. We had a heck of a time getting them out. At any rate, it got real cold. They were pouring gallons of antifreeze down the septic system on the train to keep it from freezing. They were putting straw bales underneath it to keep the wind from blowing underneath it. And it got real cold. We couldn't use the shower, so they had us go into town to the local motel to shower and get cleaned up and dressed to get back into duty. So it was an interesting time. Our temporary duty sites at those sites were a month and a half long. And I went from San Saba a month and a half to Heron Lake a month and a half. So
little change in temperature.
Yes. Yeah, we went from dodging armadillos on the highway to digging out of snowbanks.
Yeah. So and these trains, they had cook cars and sleepers and
Yep. Everything. The sleeping cubicles were, I don't know, 4 feet wide and 8 feet long.
They weren't very
And
big.
they had a folding bunk that was also used as a desk, and they had a closet that was big enough to stuff a couple of uniforms in, and that was about it. So they had showers and rest facilities and on the train, but in the Heron Lake site we couldn't use them because they were frozen. So
sure. So you do that. Is this ending your career now, or
is what?
Is this going to be the ending of your career now? Is there anything else you did that?
Well, the only combat experience that I had was negligent. During the time I was in was the Cuban crisis, and I spent a good portion of my time painting rocks that were placed around the parking lot of the site that I was at. It was on a naval ammunition depot, and we were out in the middle of it almost. And that was it. And I got out of the service when Vietnam was just starting to wind up. And so I very happy not to go to Vietnam for any reason.
So are you considered a Vietnam veteran, era veteran, or?
No.
So what?
I've never considered myself that any stretch. So.
Okay. What would you consider yourself? A Cuban crisis veteran, or?
Well, I didn't exactly hear that, but when I went in and became a radar technician, the career field that I was in had a large number of people coming out of basically the Korean era, and they were retrainees. A lot of them were aircraft mechanics, whatever, staff sergeants, tech sergeants, master sergeants, and they were no longer needed in that career field, so they put them in radar career fields, and it was full. So I went in, when I went to Keesler, I made E3, and I stayed E3 the same level the rest of my career field because of that. And hey, there was nowhere to go.
Because they phased all these people in, right?
Beg your pardon?
They phased all these people in that were another era. They brought them in, so you getting another rank was tough to do.
I'm hard of hearing, so I have trouble, hearing that. But it was disappointing, actually. I thought that I would progress through my military career, and I really didn't plan to stay in. But I thought I would at least go up a rank or two, but no way.
Yeah. So where did you muster out at?
E3.
Where did you muster out at? Where were you released?
I was released from Hastings Naval Ammunition Depot, the detachment there, and went to Lincoln Air Force Base, and they mustered me out.
Okay. And what'd you do from there?
Came back to Stephen, Minnesota, and started looking for work. Not very easy to find at that time, and I traveled around from there after that.
So what'd you do in Stephen?
Well, let's see. I worked in a plumbing and heating outfit for a while, putting air ducts in houses, and finally they had a street relaying out the streets in Stephen, so I got a job working for that outfit for a short period of time in the summertime. And I finally got tired of that, so I took a road jag out to California to see some friends from the service, and stayed out there for about a month, and then came back to Minneapolis and roomed with a friend of mine, and opened up the newspaper and saw that they had an ad in there. They were looking for electronic technicians for some kind of job they had going. So I called the office, and the guy was in a hotel downtown, and he said he was getting ready to leave, and can I make it down there in a short period of time? So I went down there. He handed me a piece of paper, said, fill this out. He was talking to somebody else, and I filled it out, and I gave it to him, and he said, here's the deal. Are you interested? We have a possible job coming up in Washington State. And he said, I'll talk to my supervisor, and when I get back to Washington, D.C., and see what's available. So I got a call from them, and they said they had an opening for somebody with my experience in radar, tracking radar, out in Washington State. And the company was called Page Communications Engineers. So I went out, flew out there, and found the site. It was a site of an Earth station, which is a communications satellite tracking station in outside of Okanagan, Washington. And we set up a portable, transportable Earth station, which connects with communication satellites, which was over the Pacific Ocean. And I worked there for, I don't know, it was close to 6 months, I think. And then while that transportable Earth station was being built, or was operating to the satellite, they built a permanent station there, which was a larger operation. So we took the transportable one apart, loaded it up on aircraft, and flew it to the Philippines. And I came back to Stephen for, I don't know, it was a week or two. Flew out to Washington, from there to San Francisco, from there to Anchorage, from there to Tokyo, and from there to Manila. And then we put up that transportable Earth station outside of Manila to communicate with the satellites. There were 12 of us that put up that Earth station, and it was an interesting time. I stayed there, I don't know, it was not quite a year putting that up and getting it operating. And we had to travel out there by helicopter once in a while. We had to travel out there with by car, and the car had a driver and a shotgun guard, and they were having trouble with some of the natives of the Philippines there, so we had to be guarded. And it was interesting, but
So it got more exciting doing that than when you were in the Air Force.
yes, indeed.
So
Yes, indeed.
you actually picked up an occupation coming out of the Air Force then,
Yeah,
as a technician.
yeah. And I stayed that the rest of the time until I retired. I went back to the cities looking for work, and contacted the state of Minnesota. They were looking for radio technicians to work for the Department of Transportation, and I actually applied for the job in Thief River, Minnesota, and that was filled by somebody that was already working for the Department of Transportation that transferred. And so they called me back up, I don't know, about a week or so later, and they said they had an opening in Duluth and wanted to know if I wanted to go to Duluth. And I said, okay, I'd go. And well, by that time, I was married and had one child, two children, and I went to work in Hopkins, Minnesota, at the DOT for a couple of weeks while the other technician was on vacation, and then went up to Duluth. And the wife stayed in Hopkins, and I was in Duluth a year, and they had an opening for a new shop in Owatonna. So I transferred from Duluth to Owatonna. It was a one-man shop, and worked there for about a year and got promoted again and came to Mankato at the radio shop here in Mankato, and stayed here the rest of the time till my retirement.
Were you required to have an FCC license?
Oh yeah.
Because you worked on transmitters. Okay.
In order to work as a radio technician, you had to have a second-class license, and I had a first-class license with a radar endorsement, whichever that meant. And in order to be promoted to be a supervisor of the shop, you had to have at least a first-class license, which I did. So when I went from Owatonna after a year, came here, I already had the first-class license.
Okay.
And
Neil, we only have a couple minutes here. I just want to say thank you for doing this interview. I sure appreciate you doing it. And I want to thank you for your service. So if we get cut off.
Oh, yeah. Like I say, basically my service consisted largely of boredom. Largely of boredom.
Okay. But you gave 4 years of your life to that service.
That's true. That's true.
Right. Thank you again, Neil.
Thank you.